Hi everybody, I hope you're all doing really well. So because we are nearing to Valentine's Day, I thought that I would take a moment to talk about my romance books, the romance books that I've been reading. And I thought, why don't we just go for a bumper romance video and talk about all of the romance books that I have read since I started BookTube, which, funnily enough, since I started my channel in May 2020, I have managed to read, or at least attempt to read, 50 romance books, which I thought was just such a nice round number, so why not talk about all of them and rank them? I understand in the context of romance book reading that 50 books is pretty small potatoes. There are romance readers who read 50 books within a month. I'm aware that I am not even scraping the surface when it comes to all of the romance books out there. Romance authors are prolific and talented. With literary fiction, you feel lucky if the author will give you a book every year. Whereas with romance authors, that's kind of a bare minimum. And yet every time they publish a book, they almost always delight. Before we get into my ranking, I should be clear on what my general interests are when it comes to romance books. Typically, I like to read historical romance and contemporary. I'm not really one for supernatural. I do tend to stay within my interests, but occasionally can branch out. And I'm definitely keen to hear any recommendations that you have based on the books I've spoken about today. This is also not a hard and fast ranking. I'm sure especially my top two favourites will interchange all the time, but this is where I am today as I'm filming. There are a lot of books to talk about. This is going to be probably quite a long video, so let's just get straight into these rankings. Now, books 48 to 50 are actually romance books that I got a good way through but ended up DNFing for whatever reason. So obviously I cannot give full thoughts on them, but clearly I had issues with them enough to not want to keep reading them. Unfortunately, book number 50 on my list is Pride, Prejudice and Other Flavours by Sonali. This is a modern reimagining of Pride and Prejudice in which the Lizzie Darcy characters are a cook and a doctor. And I was so excited for this because I believe Sonali has a lot of Jane Austen retellings. You know I love Pride and Prejudice. It's one of my favourite books of all time, so I dove straight into this one, and unfortunately it just did not live up to my expectations. I just found there to be so much exposition in here. Every other page it would be so much info dumping. I'd gotten to around about page 100 and our Lizzie Darcy stand-ins had barely interacted with each other, and you kind of feel like Pride and Prejudice is a slow burn, but it's not that slow. You at least expect by 100 pages that they would have had at least a couple of pivotal interactions, and I just found myself getting very frustrated and impatient. Book number 49 is Highly Suspicious and Unfairly Cute by Talia Hibbert. I generally do really like Talia Hibbert's books, but for whatever reason I just could not finish this one. I think the issue I had is not necessarily that it's YA, but it is YA focused in secondary school where the characters are looking towards university, applying to university, a lot of academic rivalry, and I've always thought that I had a pretty good experience with high school, but the second I was in this book I was just thrown straight back to UCAS applications to applying for university, and it was a headspace I just did not want to stay in. So as great as this book probably is, I just couldn't stay with it. And then book number 49 is probably the book that I am most likely to end up going back to and finishing, purely because it is part of a series and this has been the roadblock to that series and continuing on with it, and I do feel like I have to be a completionist. I do have to power through this book so I can get to the other side, and that is To Sir Philip with Love by Julia Quinn. This is the 5th book in the Bridgerton series focusing on Eloise, and the reason that I could not finish this book is because I really do not like her love interest. Her love interest is a widower, he has small children, and I just could not stomach the amount of times that this man was like this close at any given time to wanting to hit his children. I don't like it. I did not like being in his headspace, and I just felt like Eloise deserved a lot better. I hear that potentially it might get better, but then I also hear that people find this the worst book in the series. So I don't know what to do because I hear great things about the rest of the series. This is not the first time that a Bridgerton book has kind of disappointed me for something within its plot. We'll get onto that later. So do I finish it or do I just push through to book 6? Now we're into the books that I actually have finished. Book number 47 is my least favourite romance book that I have finished, and it is Angelica Frankenstein Makes Her Match by Sally Thorne. This is a Frankenstein reimagining in which Angelica Frankenstein, alongside her brother Victor, creates her perfect man, reanimates him, and she's trying to get him to fall in love with her. Just ethical violations all around. I was very disappointed in this one, especially because I really enjoyed the hating game, but I couldn't get over how like coercive, how manipulative this main character was, and yet all around her people are telling her what a great person she is, and I'm like, no she's not. She's one of the most immoral characters that I've ever read. Not a fan, not a fan. Book number 46 is Safia Khan Is Not Obliged by Ayisha Malik. I'd heard such great things about this one, that it was kind of like a Muslim Bridget Jones, where our main character Safia Khan is tasked with writing a Muslim dating book, which she wasn't really keen on. So you've got that plot alongside romance plots, and I just found this one a little bit confusing and a bit unfocused. All the way through this book, Sofia is very reluctant and resistant to writing this book because it's kind of been forced on her by her editor. But then out of nowhere, whenever whenever her publishers start trying to make edits, she gets really defensive and she's like, this is not the book I'm trying to write. And I'm like, mate, you were not trying to write this book in the first place. It was foisted onto you. Why are you suddenly so passionate about it? It didn't feel like there was a clear progression there. And I also just found the romance a little bit dull. I didn't feel like it was very well developed. And so, yeah, I know a lot of people love this series, but unfortunately not for me. Book number 45 is Fix Her Up by Tessa Bailey. This is the only Tessa Bailey book that I have read. I didn't have a great time with it. I thought it was a little bit dull. Main character, who is a little bit all over the place, a little bit flaky, recruits one of her brother's best friends to fake date her, all the while she's trying to find little ways to improve her life. A premise that I really like, but I just thought was a little bit bland and generic. Hasn't put me off reading more Tessa Bailey. I've heard good things about other books of hers, but this one just wasn't for me. 44 was Bringing Down the Duke by Evie Dunmore. Historical romance with a suffragist twist. Our main character is a suffragist who is tasked with trying to bring a duke into the fold, trying to get him on side with their political campaignings, but of course they fall in love along the way. I thought this was a really fantastic premise, but unfortunately the political plot ends up being dropped immediately as soon as these two start making eyes at each other. I didn't really feel like the duke was particularly swoon-worthy, especially for somebody who is so politically motivated in our main character. The fact that the duke is so easily swayed one way or the other and doesn't seem particularly motivated himself, and even when he is in love with her, he doesn't really seem to care about women's rights and the suffragist movement. I just didn't really get why she liked him, aside from him being hot and rich, which, you know, fair play, but not for me in a romance book. Book 43 is Beach Read by Emily Henry. This is unfortunately my least favourite Emily Henry to date. Two authors known for writing very different genres end up swapping genres. She will write literary fiction and he will write romance, and they come to appreciate each other's skill and expertise, as well as falling in love. Once again, another instance where the premise of the book is so much more interesting than the actual book itself. I wanted to see more about writing, about this swapping of genres, and it's really barely touched upon aside from the very beginning. I wanted to see them kind of like working out their genres, chatting to each other about their writing style, what it is that they get out of writing in these genres, and finding themselves really challenging themselves. But yeah, it's barely focused upon, so that was a bit disappointing. 42 was Taste Like Shakar by Nisha Sharma, the second book in the If Shakespeare Was an Auntie series. This book is a modern reimagining of Much Ado About Nothing, which is my favourite of Shakespeare's comedies, but unfortunately just didn't really transfer very well onto this book, which I was very surprised by because I loved the first one, but more about that later. 41 is Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldry. I know, everybody is loving this, but as I say, I'm not really much of a fantasy reader, haven't really delved into much fantasy romance, and I know everybody loves how cosy and quaint this is, but for me, I just need a little bit more plot. I need a little bit more going on. I also felt the romance was really toned down. I just wanted a bit more of it, a little more. And it just was a bit too slow paced for me. I think it's cute, all of these different people coming together, building up this cafe, but I wanted more meat. I wanted a little bit more. Book 40 is Act Your Age, Eve Brown by Talia Hibbert. I genuinely thought that Eve was going to be my favourite of the Brown sisters. She's very quirky, she's into musical theatre, you know, written for me. Maybe not the quirky part, but the musical theatre part, absolutely. So I was very disappointed actually by this third one. You know, it's not a bad book by any means, but I just didn't find the romance particularly compelling. She's having to kind of get her life together, become a bit more responsible, get a job, and so she ends up becoming a chef for this inn owner, and of course sparks start to fly. You've got a bit of grumpy sunshine going on. I should really like this. But yeah, there were so many parts of this that were just a little bit dull, and I didn't find the romance particularly believable. I enjoy Talia Hibbert's writing style, it's why I keep on coming back to her books. But yeah, just a little something missing for me with this one. 39 is Happy Place by Emily Henry. We have the main couple who are actually estranged from each other, being brought back together by their friends, inviting them over to their old summer haunt for one last time there. All the while they are trying to keep their breakup a secret from their friends because they haven't told them yet, for fear of what they'll say. But of course, along the way, this ends up being a second chance romance. Unfortunately, as much as I liked the second chance romance, I feel like that was the most interesting part of this book. For a book that is also so focused on friendship, I wanted a little bit more with the friends. I wanted to feel their personalities and their relationships to each other a bit more clearly defined. I liked the summariness, I liked the second chance romance, but I also needed the subplot with the friends to make a little bit more sense and ring a bit more true. Book 38 is The Juk and Eey by Julia Quinn, the first book in the Bridgerton books. Now, the first 2/3 of this book, absolutely fantastic. I was really pleasantly surprised. I'd heard kind of mixed things about the Bridgerton series, or at least the books, and so I was delighted to read this and find it like so fun. I really enjoyed the Regency atmosphere. I was really enjoying the romance, and then we get to an infamous part in the book which completely sours the relationship. If you've read the book or seen the TV series, you may know what I mean, but there is a sexual assault scene in here that comes around about 2/3 into the book, which is kind of horrifying to read and does not get called out for what it was and is kind of swept under the rug. I don't get it. I don't get it. It completely sours the rest of the book, and it's such a shame because what was there originally was so great. And I will say what was there is the reason that I did continue with the Bridgerton series, even though that really left an awful taste in my mouth. The rest of the book was a 5-star. That scene in particular and what comes next was solid 1-star. I did not enjoy that, but I kind of felt like I will continue with the rest of the series to see what else is out there, because I do think that Julia Quinn is very, very funny and knows how to write Regency romance. Just don't want the awful in there. Book number 37 is The Governess Game by Tessa Dare. Tessa Dare is probably my favourite romance author so far, at least in historical romance. This is the third book, I think, in the Girl Meets Duke series, in which our main character Alexandra, who is a clock enthusiast, ends up accidentally becoming governess to the 2 children who are the wards to the local rake in town. She's met him before, he doesn't recognise her. They kind of push each other's buttons. She's trying to get him to make more of an effort with the children. He's becoming very attracted to her. Of course, sparks fly. You know where it's going. And yeah, for me, this one was good fun. I enjoyed the romance, but it was just about 100 pages too long for me. I felt like there was a little bit too much push and pull, will they, won't they, for me. Like, you know where it's going, so just get there a bit quicker, please. Also, I don't know how you feel personally about kids in your romance. Sometimes they can be really great, sometimes they can be a little bit grating, and I found these girls to be just a tiny bit annoying. I understand why they are the way that they are, but also I was like, oh, for God's sake, get your act together. Book number 36 is All the Fields by Olivia Dade, the second book in the spoiler alert series. TV star who is a little bit rogue is forced to have a handler by his producer to keep him out of mischief. He's very resistant to this, and he's really trying to push his handler's buttons, but of course the more that they get to know each other, the more we realise that he's a bit misunderstood, that maybe the media are portraying him in a way that isn't actually true. The more he starts to appreciate her, and they start to develop a real bonding connection. This was mostly quite good fun, aside from the fact that there is a strong emphasis on fan fiction within this book, because this TV star is one of the main characters in a series that is kind of like a Game of Thrones parody. A lot of features of this series are like Game of Thrones, and he ends up becoming really interested in fan fiction and writing his own fan fiction. And there's a lot of lingo to do with fan fiction. These characters feel very chronically online and kind of talk to each other like that. And you know, I am a chronically online person, but even I was kind of like, what is happening? Why are people talking like this? I have read fan fiction, but I've not read quite as much as I think Olivia Dade has. And yeah, there were just moments where I was like, can we please stop talking about this and just get back to the story? But it was fun. I definitely want to pick up the third book in the series. Book number 35 is Check and Mate by Ali Hazelwood. Instead of her typical STEM-focused romance, we've got a chess-focused romance, and this is YA. Ex-chess player ends up being pulled back into the game for money and startles everybody when she ends up beating the chess prodigy. He in turn is very frustrated but intrigued by her. Once again, sparks fly. This was fine. It kept me engaged while I read it, but for me personally, not one of Ali Hazelwood's best romance books. Also, hearing these 2 teenagers talk made me feel so very old, and I'm only 28, so like, oh, I felt so decrepit. Oh my god. Like, I know I'm not a cool person, but I don't need it to be emphasised this much. 34 is The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston. In this we have a ghostwriter who has been really procrastinating writing a book for the author that she ghostwrites for. However, she has a new editor who really pulls her up on this, tells her that she must deliver the manuscript by the next day. She ends up having to go back to her home for a family emergency, and then gets a knock on the door, and who should it be but her editor, but in ghost form, because it appears that he has died, but his spirit seems to be wanting to visit her for whatever reason. This one I wanted to read because it was a little bit more, not really a spooky read, but it has that ghostly element. I was reading it around Halloween. It was very, very sweet. I definitely saw where it was going, but I felt invested. There are definitely a lot of cliches in here. I don't think it's mind-blowing or anything special, but this was pretty good fun. 33 is Josh and Hazel's Guide to Not Dating by Christina Lauren. Bit of grumpy sunshine going on here. Oh, not even really grumpy. Josh isn't grumpy. He's just a bit of a normie, whereas Hazel is like the kooky, manic pixie dream girl who ends up charging, bulldozing into his life, wanting to be best friends with him, and you know, he can't help but be a little bit charmed by her. Christina Lauren as a writing pair are always really fantastic. I love the way that they write their romance. I think the main thing for me with this is that Hazel, even though she's very fun, she's a very fun character, I did find myself getting a bit frustrated with her and some of the things that she would do and say. You know, if she was my friend, I would defend her to the ends of the earth, but while reading her, I was like, oh my god, Hazel, why are you doing this? And that was the only real thing that kind of held this back for me. I love her relationship with Josh. I love how like accepting he is of her and how you see him grow to like her more and more. It was very, very cute, just maybe not one that I'm going to go back to instantly. 32 is The X Talk by Rachel Lynn Solomon. 2 rivals at a radio show end up being foisted into the host position and made to pretend that they are two exes hosting a love and relationships show, trying to keep it under wraps from everybody around them that they are not really exes, that it's all based on a lie, but the more that they're starting to work together, the more that they are starting to like each other. Another one that is very, very sweet, very fun. Really enjoyed this dynamic, especially because it is a slightly older woman and a younger guy. Not something I tend to read a lot in romance. And the way that this just subtle, 5-year age difference between a 28, 29-year-old and a 24-year-old can mean that they just have slightly different life experiences, they push each other's buttons. It's Grumpy Sunshine where he is the sunshine, she's the grump, and he kind of brings her out of her shell. She makes him a little bit more grounded and realistic. Very, very sweet, though not my favourite. 31 is You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty by Akwaeke Emezi. Our main character is really reeling from the death of her husband, trying to fill the void any way that she can. She slowly but surely ends up getting back onto the dating scene, ends up dating this man, and then he brings her home to meet his family and she ends up falling for his father. This one I honestly wasn't sure where to rank it because, to be honest with you, I don't really like the romance in here. I don't know, there's something about the dating the father of your boyfriend thing that just made me feel a bit like, ugh. But the writing in this, especially on grief, is so very good. It's definitely one of the best written books here, but the romance is on the lower side for me. I can definitely see why people like this. I really liked it. I did a whole video about this and all of the literary connections that I had to it, which I will link down below. But yeah, I don't know where to put this, so I'm going to put it kind of middle of the row, just because I feel like if the romance isn't great, it can't rank too high on a romance book video. You know what I mean? But I do definitely think everybody should read this. It is fantastic. 30 is A Merry Little Meet Cute by Julie Murphy and Sierra Simone. In this, we've got a director who is desperately trying to search for cast and crew for his kind of hallmarky Christmas romance movie. He has previously directed adult films. He ends up hiring lots of crew from previous films that he's worked on in that field and casts the leading lady as one of the porn stars that he worked with the promise that this will bring her into mainstream films. However, they have to keep it under wraps, the films that they used to make. It's mainly told through her point of view, and we see her developing a relationship with the leading man as they film this romance film over Christmas, learn more about each other, but also obviously she's holding on to this big secret which would completely destroy her career if it got out. Very, very different dynamic for me. It was very fun, raunchy and Christmassy at the same time, in equal measure. Definitely engaged while I was reading it. Wasn't expecting it, but it was very fun. Book 29 is Love Theoretically by Ali Hazelwood. This is probably her most academically minded books yet. We're looking at a lecturer who, as is the case in academia, is very sorely underpaid, who has to take up multiple jobs in order to pay rent, including being kind of an escort, or at the very least she ends up being hired by a lot of men to be a fake girlfriend to kind of get their parents or their friends off their backs about dating. However, what she really covets is a tenured position at a university that will give her financial freedom and stability. She applies for a position that seems perfect for her until she finds out that one of the hiring managers is actually the brother of a previous client who has known her under a different name. And while he is not spilling her secret, he seems determined to take her down. He's also a bit of an academic rival, so we have a true, fiery rivals to lovers going on here. This was another one that was very fun, very engaging. I understood the conflict very well. However, once again, one that is just a tad too long. You know that they're going to end up together, so there didn't need to be quite so much back and forth in my opinion. But I did really enjoy this discussion on academia and just how unfair it can be. Book number 28 is One True Loves by Taylor Jenkins Reid, in which we see the main character and her relationship to her first husband. They travel the world, they're real adventurers, but then very tragically on their first anniversary, his plane ends up crashing and they never recover his body. We see her as a widow, grieving, and then finally after a lot of time has passed, she ends up finding love with a childhood friend. However, upon her engagement, she ends up getting a phone call and it is her first husband who has finally been found. And so of course she's very conflicted when she has these two wonderful men in her life who both love her, who she loves. Does she go back to her first husband, or have the years gone by and they've drifted apart? Is she now more suited for this new man in her life? This was really lovely and heartbreaking. I did really enjoy this story. The only reason that this is a little bit lower for me is that I feel like you can kind of feel it's one of Taylor Jenkins Reid's first books. It starts off quite slow paced. I didn't feel like the writing was particularly great, but I was definitely engaged by this story, engaged by this love story. Book 27 is An Offer from a Gentleman by Julia Quinn. This is the third book in the Bridgerton series. In this we're following Benedict and Sophie. This one is a weird one for Bridgerton because it is kind of a bit of a Cinderella retelling, but saying that, I do love a Cinderella retelling and this was very, very cute. I really like these two's banter back and forth. I like how it is a bit of a twist to the Cinderella retelling. I don't want to go too much into spoilers on that. You'll have to read it yourself to find out. The one thing I wasn't really keen on was the couple's conflict resolution. A lot of the time these two, whenever they get into conflict, are kind of screaming at each other. There's a lot of like Benedict grabbing hold of Sophie and being like, you don't know what you want. And I'm kind of like, okay, hands off. And once again with Sophie, whenever she gets annoyed with Benedict, we'll just kind of start hitting him on his chest. And I don't love that either. I'm kind of like, lay off each other, please. Once again, everything around that, very, very cute, very wholesome. But there were just moments with that where I'd be like, Book 26 is Book Lovers by Emily Henry. In this we have a literary agent who has always butted heads with this one editor who never seems to accept her books, going on vacation with her sister to this small town in the US that inspired one of her most famous books that she ever commissioned, bumping into this editor, and sparks start to fly. This one, very, very cute, very typical Emily Henry. I really enjoyed the discussion on different romance book tropes and the way that these two characters would subvert them. For me, the longer that I've gone without reading this book, the more details have kind of slipped, so maybe it's one that I need to come back to. But yeah, I always enjoy a little bit of prodding and poking at different romance book tropes. It feels very playful, it feels very fun. Book 25, halfway through, is The Kiss Quotient by Helen Huang, in which we have our main character Stella, who works in econometrics and is very much pressured by her family to have a husband, to settle down. However, Stella has always really struggled with this and struggles a lot with relationships, particularly as a result of her Asperger's, people just not really getting her. And so she decides that the only logical thing that she can do is to hire an escort to teach her how to be a good girlfriend, in which we meet Josh Im, the escort in question, who is very adamant that he does not accept repeat clients, but the more that he starts to get to know Stella, the more intrigued he is by her. Of course, there's a strong attraction there. She's trying to keep her Asperger's a secret. He's got secrets of his own for the reason that he is an escort in the first place. And it is just a very, very sweet love story. 24 is After I Do by Taylor Jenkins Reid, in which it's another second chance romance. We see the growing relationship of this couple, we see them get married, and then we see their marriage slowly deteriorate until they get to the point where they decide that they are going to have a year-long break. And after a year has gone by, they are going to make the crucial decision whether or not they should divorce, but they have to live entirely separate lives until then. Very, very different kind of romance for me. I'm not used to the main characters spending so little time together, but I thought it was really, really well done. You felt the stakes, you weren't sure where it was going to go. I really enjoyed this. 23 is This Time Next Year by Sophie Cousens. I actually have a full review of this down below. This is a New Year's based romance in which we have two main characters who were born on New Year's Day, born in the same hospital in the same room. However, they lived vastly different lives, and we follow through 1 year, going backwards and forwards through their lives, seeing how their lives differed, seeing how their relationship progresses, and also how the people around them are changed by their budding friendship and relationship. Once again, another really sweet romance. I enjoyed that there was focus not just on the main romance but also the family and friends around them. It's a story about lots of different people trying to make changes to their lives, making their lives better, but they're not perfect. They do get things wrong. There's great focus on mental health, on class in here, and yeah, it is a pretty solid book. 22 is One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. Our main character moves to New York, ends up making some very fun, quirky friends. However, when she's on the subway, she is constantly meeting this woman called Jane, who she's very, very attracted to. However, it turns out that Jane has a bit of a supernatural secret, in that Jane is actually from the 1970s but seems to be stuck in a time loop where she cannot get off the tube and she cannot age. And so the story is their developing relationship, trying to unlock this curse, but what is going to happen once they do actually unlock the curse? Will Jane stay in this time and place, or will she revert to the 1970s and never see her again? This was so very fun and compelling. Once again, I'm not really one for much supernatural fantasy, but I felt like this made it very fun, and it felt very real for such a weird plot. The main reason I'm marking this down is that there is a sex scene that takes place on the subway, and you know, it's this culmination of their relationship, and all I could think while it was going on was, oh my god, there are going to be so many germs on that subway. Why would you ever want to do that? But very sweet nonetheless, and I need Casey McQuiston to write more, please. Book 21 is Get a Life, Chloe Brown. We have our main character Chloe Brown, who has chronic pain as a result of fibromyalgia. As a result of this, she has been very much stuck in her parents' home and determines one day, after she has a bit of a life and death encounter, that she is going to move out, she's going to reclaim a life for herself and just feel like she is more of an adult. And that's exactly what she does. She also writes a bit of a list for herself for lots of different things that she wants to do with her life, and along the way ends up falling for the janitor of her flat, and it is very, very cute and steamy. Editing Charlotte here. The reason that this is actually a little bit lower than you might expect it, considering how much I liked it, is because there is a third act conflict in this book that for me just felt a little bit out of nowhere. These two characters communicate really well for the rest of the book, and then there is the third act breakup, which I just didn't really like. Otherwise, great book. Always really nice to have chronic illness representation. I know it's meant so much to a lot of people I know. And yeah, very Very sweet. Book 20 is Loath to Love You by Ali Hazelwood. This is actually 3 novellas all tied up in one. The main connection being that the 3 women involved in these stories are best friends, all involved in some sort of STEM pursuit, and all of them having enemies to lovers romances. It is very cute. I do like some of the stories better than others. However, the main tying connection of these friends and how they connect with each other despite living very far away was so sweet and lovely that it just bumped it up for me. 19 is A Lady's Guide to Fortune Hunting by Sophie Irwin. Regency romance in which our main character is determined that she is going to make a match in order to lift herself and her sister out of what is very soon going to be poverty. If she or her sister do not marry within about 6 weeks, then they are going to be destitute. And so she focuses in on this one man, this one rich guy, really integrates herself into the family. However, then his brother turns up and he is very skeptical of her, determined that she and his brother do not marry. But of course, you know, it's because he's secretly in love with her. Even though I knew where this was going to end up going, there were still moments of this where I was like, oh my goodness. I really love the sibling dynamics in this book. Any of you who are big fans of Bridgerton and have seen season 2 or read The Viscount Who Loved Me, this is basically like a gender swapped version of this. We've got a very protective big brother looking out for his younger brother, trying to make sure he doesn't get taken advantage of, and it is just good fun. Book 18 is The True Love Experiment by Christina Lauren. A romance novelist has never fallen in love, and she gets recruited to be the face of a dating show. However, tensions arise when she ends up falling for her director. But with a lot of jobs on the line and a lot of reputations on the line, how are they going to manage to keep this secret? The beginning of this was very slow for me, but as these two started to fall for each other, spend more time with each other, the stakes felt very real. It felt very true to life. I really enjoyed it. Once again, even though I knew where it was going to go, I was on the edge of my seat like, oh my god, are they going to stay together? Ooh. Book 17 is The Devil in Winter by Elisa Claypass. This is very much a rogue and a rake term good. Sebastian St. Vincent, who was the villain of a previous book, ends up receiving a proposal and proposition that he cannot refuse to marry our main character Evie, who is a bit of a retiring wallflower, in order to get her out of a bad family situation, and in return he will be able to inherit her riches. So they end up racing to Gretna Green, getting married, but of course when they come home, that is when the trouble begins. This shouldn't work for me, and particularly this love interest shouldn't work for me. Sebastian St. Vincent, definitely a bit of a problematic fave, but I mainly love this because his interactions with Evie are very funny. In terms of love languages, his is very much acts of service, and that is how this guy really manages to warm my heart and actually make me want to be on his side, even though, you know, like on paper, very bad. Not a person you should be rooting for, but he managed to charm me. I don't know how he did it. Still a very fun book. 16 is Dating Dr Dill by Nisha Sharma, the first book in the If Shakespeare Was an Auntie series, which is focused on readapting Taming of the Shrew for a modern day. We've got our main character of Karina, who has been told by her family that unless she gets married, she is not going to be able to inherit her family home. We've also got Prem Varma, a doctor who specialises in the heart, who hosts the Dr Dill show, and who is very convinced that love is bad for you. They end up having a very awkward encounter, which leads to them having to fake date in order to keep both of their reputations intact. But of course, because it is Taming of the Shrew, it is very much enemies to lovers. They are screaming at each other, they want to throw things at each other, but of course the more time they spend together, the more they realise that there's more to each other than they first thought, and of course that strong hate turns to strong love. Once again, I should not enjoy this because, you know, the level of vitriol and screaming at each other that begins this book, it's not what I'm about. I don't enjoy it. But for some reason, knowing that this is a retelling of Taming of the Shrew, that is the only way that this works, and it does work. Thank goodness it does work eventually. But more than that, I really enjoyed this discussion within this book on how you show love to people, because Prem finds it so very hard to be able to admit his love for Karina. But that is what she needs, that is what she loves, and it's a story about having to meet each other part way, understand what the other needs. And there are moments in this where it is kind of heartbreaking. I was very invested. 14 is The UNH Home Mooners by Christina Lauren. Another enemies to lovers as a result of some forced proximity. The best man and maid of honour of a wedding, who have previously hated each other, end up being thrown together on a honeymoon holiday after all of the other guests end up becoming ill. And so these two have to keep up this pretense that they are in fact the married couple, and hijinks ensue. This was actually one of the first like straight up romance books that I read, and it just really whetted my appetite for the genre. I haven't reread it since, and I do hear some more negative things about this book as time goes on. I don't know how much of it is people just don't always love enemies to lovers, but I had a great time with this. It made me laugh. It made me very anxious at times, especially the lengths that they had to go to fake this relationship. But yeah, I had a great time. Next up is The Wallflower Wager by Tessa Dare. Regency romance in which our main character is a massive animal lover, and so as a result basically has a petting zoo within her home. As a result of this, she is not very well liked by her neighbours, and particularly when Gabriel Duke moves in next door wanting to sell his place, but knowing that Lady Penelope and her animals are going to really ruin his chances of selling this house off with all of her antics. They end up spending more time with each other. He's trying to force her to sell her animals off, but she will only agree to this if he manages to find loving homes for all of them. This was just really good fun, very funny, and it felt like a really fun, like, animal-based twist on this romance that we see so much. Book 13 is The Hating Game by Sally Thorne. I've kind of gone back and forth on my position with The Hating Game. The first time I read it, I was kind of like, oh, I don't know, this might be a 3-4 star, but the more that I think about this, the more I enjoy it. I think the main issue that I had with this originally was that it is very much focused on the romance, and we don't really get much time with other supporting characters, which is usually what I need for a romance book to be really great. So in this, we have Lucy and Josh who work together but are rivals, and they're up for the same new position at work that will give them a lot more power and authority over the other. The tensions are high, but of course there's much more bubbling under the surface with these two, and I just found their interactions to be so funny and so charming. It's ridiculous, but it's also just really good fun. I just love their banter back and forth, and I just keep returning to this one. Book number 12 is Unequal Affections by Laura S. Ormanston. Unfortunately, you can only seem to get this on Audible. You cannot get print copies of this book anywhere, and I don't know about ebook, but this is another Pride and Prejudice retelling in which the main conceit of this book is Pride and Prejudice, but Elizabeth, after Mr. Darcy's first disastrous proposal to her, actually says yes because she realises that financially she can't afford not to. And it's this massive twist on the Pride and Prejudice story because it is that main argument after the first proposal that really prompts him and her to reevaluate themselves and to make real change. And so how is this romance going to pan out if they don't have that pivotal moment? And I just thought this was a really fantastic thought experiment. And there were aspects of this story and resolution to the Pride and Prejudice story that I actually thought worked a lot better than the original. Not entirely, don't get me wrong. The original Pride and Prejudice is still the absolute best, but I thought this was really, really well done. Book 11 is 9 Rules to Break When Romancing a Rake by Sarah MacLean. In this we have our resident wallflower Calpurnia, who is 28 years old. Her family have firmly decided that she is on the shelf and are putting all of their efforts into her younger sister and getting her married off. Callie feels very neglected and feels like her life is just passing her by, and after some prompting from her brother ends up writing a list of all these different acts that she would want to do if she were a man and if she were able to take life into her own hands. And slowly but surely she ends up trying to tick more of these off. Along the way she ends up being entangled with the Duke of Ralston, who is a notorious rake but just keeps on being in all of the spots that she ends up, and it's just very, very cute. I love how this little wallflower is really brought out of her shell. I have a bit of a soft spot for wallflowers because honestly, if I was in a Regency romance, that is who I would be. And I just really liked Calpurnia really coming into her own, being more confident, and I thought her romance with Ralston was really sweet as well. Book 10 is Take a Hint, Dani Brown. This is the second in the Brown Sisters trilogy, and I feel like the main reason I love this so much is because of the leading man, Zafir, who is a security guard who loves listening to romance audiobooks in his free time. A sweeter man has never existed. I love this guy. But they end up fake dating after he ends up saving her while she's at university, and so there's a lot of media attention on them, a lot of people thinking that they must be boyfriend and girlfriend, and so they just kind of go along with this, and I just love their dynamic. Do I love their dynamic or do I just love Zaf? I think I might just love Zaf, but anyway, it was still great. It was still my favourite of the three. Book number 9 is The Viscount Who Loved Me by Julia Quinn, the second book in the Bridgerton series. In this we are following Anthony and Kate. Anthony has determined that he is going to end up in a loveless marriage. He does need to get married to secure his line, and so determines that he is going to marry the diamond of the season, who ends up being Kate's little sister. Kate, however, does not have great feelings about Anthony for her sister and is determined to keep him away, and so once again we've got a little bit more enemies to lovers, in which these two rivals are completely well suited to each other. And I feel like if you've only ever watched season 2 of Bridgerton, then you definitely should give the book a go, especially because I love how their relationship once they are married ends up continuing, and it becomes more of a plot, particularly Anthony's like fear of committing to Kate, fear of truly letting himself love her, and where all of that stems from. I thought it was really, really well done, and I was really pleasantly surprised. Book number 8 is Spoiler Alert by Olivia Dade. Once again we are back with a star of this Game of Thrones like TV show, who on social media ends up coming to the aid of a cosplayer who's being trolled for the fact that she is a plus size woman engaging in cosplay, and in order to prove the trolls wrong, he ends up asking her on a date, and things go from there. Upon meeting her, he realises that he recognises her, and it's that she writes fanfiction about his character but unbeknownst to her, he also writes fan fiction about his series. But of course, if anybody were to know this, then he would end up getting fired. And so they have this blossoming romance, but with a secret in the middle. I don't know if it's just that I really love Notting Hill, but I do enjoy a good like celebrity and normal person pairing. I don't know if there's just like a bit of wish fulfillment there, I don't know. But I love their relationship. I love how instantly smitten he is with our main lady. But of course, there is tension there. There is a secret being kept. And there are moments in this where I was like, oh God, what's going to happen next? The next two are both Ali Hazelwood's, and I kind of talk about them interchangeably. It is The Love Hypothesis and Love on the Brain by Ali Hazelwood. Once again, STEM-based romances. In The Love Hypothesis, you've got the main character who is a PhD student who ends up fake dating a professor within her department as a way of keeping her best friend off her back. In Love on the Brain, we've got our main character who is an astrophysicist who ends up being hired by NASA. However, she finds out that she is going to be working with Levi Ward, who has been her academic rival, and she is dreading working with him. How is he going to treat her? But then is pleasantly surprised as he is very supportive of her, and maybe she is starting to reevaluate how she's always perceived him. Everyone always complains about Ali Hazelwood, about how her stories are cheesy, about how it's the same characters repeated over and over again. But for me, these characters were all very different. She definitely has certain tropes that she goes back to that she's comfortable with, but I feel like each of the characters are pretty well defined, and I just find them really good fun. Are there some silly moments? Absolutely, but you know, I don't come to romance for any sort of reality. You know, I can suspend my disbelief for a little bit. I just say, let us have fun with our romance. That's exactly what Ali Hazelwood gives me. Book number 5 is You and Me on Vacation by Emily Henry. This is definitely my favourite of Emily Henry's books, the one that I do keep going back to. We have our two best friends, once again another grumpy sunshine pairing, who for 10 years were going on holiday with each other, both having a sense of wanderlust, wanting to get out there, but having to do it on the cheap. But then in the present day timeline, we know that they're estranged for whatever reason, we don't know yet, but she ends up inviting him on one last vacation to hopefully patch things up. Slowly but surely through the course of the book, we are flashing back to previous holidays and seeing what went wrong. I just love their dynamic so very much, and even though you do know where it's going to go, there is still that tension because their friendship is so strong that you are afraid that they're going to end up ruining it. I also enjoyed, even though it was a bit of a sharp contrast toward the end, there is a discussion in here on the importance of therapy and kind of like working out your issues that both of them have to get to. There's a lot of talking in here, really having to work at their relationship and meet each other in the middle, and yeah, I really like this one. Book number 4 is Romancing Mr. Bridgerton by Julia Quinn, the 4th book, which is Penelope and Colin's story, which I am so very much looking forward to seeing on Netflix. Why does it have to be May? I don't know, but I really love this. In contrast to so many of the other books on this list, this is friends to lovers, but of course Penelope has been desperately in love with Colin for many years. He's always regarded her as like a little sister figure in his life, but slowly through the course of the book he starts to reevaluate, seeing her for the gem that she really is. But Penelope has a bit of a secret, and how are things going to unravel once Colin discovers it? Guys, I love this one. This is my favourite Bridgerton book so far. And once again, I think it's just because I do love a wallflower and her getting her time in the sun, getting her time to shine and having other people realise how great she is. I think the other thing that I love about Penelope and Colin is their conflict resolution, as opposed to other Bridgerton books where the couples resolve their conflicts in less than ideal ways. What I love about Penelope and Colin is that they really talk things out. There are moments in this book where they end up having an argument that you think is going to be like that typical third act breakup where everything just goes wrong because they're not communicating, they're not listening to each other. But that never happens with this book. When Penelope and Colin argue with each other, they keep on going forward. They keep talking to each other, and eventually they do end up landing at some sort of conclusion. It might not be that the issue is put to bed, but they've ended up in a better place in understanding each other more, and I really appreciated it with this book. So for goodness sake, May cannot come soon enough. I want to see this on the screen. Book number 3 is The Dutchess Steel by Tessa Dare. This was one of my favourite books of 2023. We have the Duke of Ashbury, who has been injured during the Napoleonic War and has come home with half of his body scarred and burned as a result, which prompts his fiancée to end up leaving him and him to become very embittered as a result. But he knows that he does have to eventually marry and sire heirs in order to keep his family line, in order to keep his inheritance, and who should come stumbling into his office but Emma Gladstone, who was the seamstress for his ex-fiance's wedding dress, who has come for payment. And Ash ends up proposing to her because he kind of knows that she can't do otherwise. It is a very good position for her to be in, and while she is a little bit unsure, she does eventually agree. And so it's this dynamic of the two of them learning more about each other, she trying to open him up and getting him to engage with her a bit more. And I think the main reason I like this is he is so incredibly funny, and she also does not stand for any of his crap. They are very evenly matched, they are so attracted to each other, and I just love their dynamic. I also love the fact that Ash only curses in Shakespeare. That is just golden to me. Book number 2, and as I say, 2 and 1, do interchange at any given time. As I say, I tend to go towards historical romance and contemporary romance. I flip-flop between the two, so depending on the day I might change my mind on which one is top. But for now, let's say that number 2 is When a Scot Ties the Knot by Tessa Dare. I have recommended this book to so many people, and one of my favourite things is people telling me that they have read this book on my recommendation and they loved it. In fact, I think it's my proudest moment on BookTube is the fact that Scott over at Gunpowder Fiction and Plot ended up reading this and really enjoying it. Just pat on my own back, I am so pleased with myself. So in this we have our main character, Madeline Gracechurch, who once again, another wallflower, but who ends up creating her own fictional fiancé in order to get her family off of her back. And in order to keep this ruse up, she ends up sending these letters to this fictional man, Captain Logan Mackenzie. However, 10 years go by, and who should come knocking at her door but a very real Captain Logan Mackenzie who has received all of her letters and is now kind of blackmailing her into marrying him so that he can inherit her lands and be able to provide for his remaining soldiers. It is a premise that absolutely should not work, and it's absolutely ridiculous, but I loved it so much. I love these two. I love how funny it is. I love how they get to know each other. I love how they're both just a little bit funny, a little bit quirky. I love like the ragtag team of soldiers that he brings back, and they all have very fun personalities. But there's also like real hurt in both of their lives that is explored throughout the course of the book. It's just lovely. I love it so much. Which leaves number 1, my, at least at this time, favourite romance book that I've read so far, which is Red, White and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. The joy on my face, just look at that. In which we are in like an alternative 2020, in which we have this fictional son of the president, Alex, who has a real strong rivalry with a Prince of England. After they end up causing a bit of ruckus, a bit of a diplomatic incident, these two are forced to become fake friends, and so are spending a lot more time with each other, but learning along the way that they've completely underestimated the other, that they actually really enjoy spending time in each other's company. And of course, as they go along, they start to fall in love. I love Alex and Henry, they are so funny. Alex's personality, I feel like in real life he might grate on me just a little bit because he is so snarky, so sarcastic, but I love these two together. I think the reason that I do love like rivals to lovers is because there is so much snarky, sarcastic banter, and you see these walls starting to be broken down, but also this book is just good fun. All the characters are great in this, and the more that I read this, the more I get out of it. The first time that I read this was in 2020, and the reason I picked it up, maybe a bit TMI, was that I was on day 2. I was feeling day 2 feelings, I was feeling a bit of pain, and I decided I needed something that was going to be comforting, that was going to just make me laugh, and that's exactly what I got with this book. It's just a warm blanket for the soul, and it made me very, very happy. I defy you to not have fun with this book. So there we go, those are very, very short, I wanted to be snappy but probably not very snappy thoughts on the 50 romance books that I have read since I joined BookTube. As I say, I am only scratching the surface with these reads here. I am very much looking forward to hearing recommendations that you may have and just continuing on this journey. As I say, probably some of the first romance books I was reading was in 2020. I was dipping my toes a little bit more in 2021, but then especially in 2022 I started listening to the Heaving Bosoms podcast, which is a romance book podcast. It is incredibly fun and funny, and so since 2022 my romance reading has really exploded. That's carried on into 2023, and I hope is going to continue into 2024 because I'm just having a jolly good time. Please do let me know if you've read any of the books that I've spoken to you about today. Alternatively, let me know about any romance books that you recommend. I would love to hear from you. I hope you're having a fantastic, fantastic day, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks. Bye.